Tonight, the president brings Muslims a message of peace.
Assalamu alaikum.
And a plea for better relations.
I've come here to Cairo to seek a new beginning between the United States and Muslims around the world.
I'm Katie Couric. Also tonight, the first piece of Flight 447 wreckage is recovered. But the flight recorders are still missing. Is there a better high-tech way to monitor an airliner? Freedom, it's still elusive in China.
You can't take photo.
20 years after the bloody crackdown on pro-democracy demonstrators in Tiananmen Square. And 65 years after D-Day, correcting an error etched in stone.
This is the CBS Evening News with Katie Couric.
Good evening, everyone. Who could have imagined this in the days and months after 9/11? An American president named Barack Hussein Obama, son of a Muslim, standing at the center of the Islamic world, quoting from the Quran and extending a hand of friendship. In an extraordinary address in Cairo today, President Obama called for a new beginning in U.S. relations with Muslims, defended the war in Afghanistan but not in Iraq, and said the attacks of 9/11 had led America in some cases to act contrary to our ideals. The president has flown on now to Germany, where tomorrow he'll visit the concentration camp memorial at Buchenwald. Chip Reid is traveling with Mr. Obama and begins our coverage of his momentous speech.
The president began with the Muslim greeting of peace.
Assalamu alaikum.
Then explained why he feels so compelled to address the Muslim world.
I've come here to Cairo to seek a new beginning between the United States and Muslims around the world.
It's a theme he's thought and talked about for years, rooted in personal experience he sometimes downplayed on the campaign trail.
I'm a Christian, but my father came from a Kenyan family that includes generations of Muslims. As a boy, I spent several years in Indonesia and heard the call of the azan at the break of dawn and at the fall of dusk.
He called on Americans to abandon negative images of Muslims.
I consider it part of my responsibility as President of the United States to fight against negative stereotypes of Islam wherever they appear.
And calling for even-handedness, he asked Muslims to do the same.
Just as Muslims do not fit a crude stereotype, America is not the crude stereotype of a self-interested empire.
After the calls for unity, though, came the tough talk. He condemned extremist violence and defended the war in Afghanistan as a necessary response to 9/11.
But let us be clear. Al-Qaeda killed nearly 3,000 people on that day. The victims were innocent men, women, and children from America and many other nations who had done nothing to harm anybody. And yet Al-Qaeda chose to ruthlessly murder these people.
On Middle East peace, he was cheered for supporting the creation of a Palestinian state and for condemning Israel's policy on settlements.
The United States does not accept the legitimacy of continued Israeli settlements. This construction violates previous agreements and undermines efforts to achieve peace. It is time for these settlements to stop.
But in one of the toughest lines in the speech, he lashed out at Palestinian violence.
It is a sign neither of courage nor power to shoot rockets at sleeping children or to blow up old women on a bus. That's not how moral authority is claimed. That's how it is surrendered.
On issues from democracy to religious freedom to women's rights, the president criticized Muslim societies that deny basic freedoms.
And I respect those women who choose to live their lives in traditional roles. But it should be their choice.
Most of the speech was well received by the audience at Cairo University.
Thank you.
Despite all the hype, though, the president downplayed any short-term effects.
The change cannot happen overnight. No single speech can eradicate years of mistrust.
At 55 minutes, the speech was the president's longest yet, but amid all those words, there was not a single specific new policy. Chip Reed, CBS News, Cairo.
It was his longest speech, as Chip said, and it had potentially his largest audience when you consider more than 100 million Muslims had access to it on radio, television, and of course on the internet. Muslims, Arabs, Israelis. The speech had something for everyone, and it was about everyone. We go back now to Cairo and our chief foreign affairs correspondent, Lara Logan.
President Obama's words were heard even here inside a tent in Gaza, this family living near the ruins of their home, destroyed by Israeli bulldozers. Israelis also gathered around televisions, glued to every word. Obama's speech was no small event in the Middle East. From the coffee shops of Lebanon and Saudi Arabia, across the Islamic world to Afghanistan, Pakistan, even Indonesia, Muslims everywhere listened.
Thank you very much.
He's a star.
He's a star?
There's an energy in the room that you can. I don't know if you can feel it, but definitely I can.
The excitement was greatest on the streets of Cairo. Not surprising, since this ancient city is where he chose to deliver his address.
I've come here to Cairo to seek a new beginning.
This is a first in Cairo. The name of an American president on T-shirts and souvenirs on sale here. It's a sign of Barack Obama's personal popularity and how much is resting on his shoulders. That was reflected on TV channels that broadcasted live to millions across the Muslim world. The speech was big news, even leading the main evening bulletin in Iran.
Barack Obama says U.S. strong bonds with Israel are unbreakable.
The reaction was mixed. Arab leaders conspicuous by their absence, and it was no surprise that Obama's comments on Israel and the Palestinians dominated the discussions.
The situation for the Palestinian people is intolerable.
Many in this region felt the president didn't go far enough in condemning Israeli violence against Palestinians.
And Mr. Obama asked Hamas to stop their rockets. In the same moment, he didn't speak of anything about 1,500 Palestinians killed in the last invasion of Israel in Gaza in 2009.
In Israel itself, the speech led all broadcasts, with a sense of major change in the U.S. attitude towards its old ally, Israel no longer the favored son.
There is no doubt he offered things clearly. He offered things eloquently. They were perhaps a little bit naive. The question, of course, is to what point this vision is a realistic vision.
An Israeli government statement welcomed Obama's plea for peace, but avoided any reference to his calls for a settlement freeze in the West Bank and the creation of an independent Palestinian state, demands that Israel's hawkish Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu continues to reject.
The statements that he said are very, very politically threatening, and he must be very, very honest and very realistic and very strong to be able to say those things and not be afraid of what's going to come next.
Dampening some of the enthusiasm for what is widely seen here as an historic speech, the fact that Obama's main allies in this region, like Egypt and Saudi Arabia, are oppressive regimes, unpopular with many of their people. Katie?
Lara Logan in Cairo, thanks very much. Now, no trip to Egypt would be complete without a visit to the Great Pyramids of Giza. For more than an hour, the president played the role of tourist, walking in and around these ancient marvels. Experts believe they were built about 5,000 years ago. The president also gazed up in wonder at the Sphinx, the giant sculpture that features a human head on top of a lion's body. And inside one of the pyramids, Mr. Obama came upon a hieroglyphic image that he found, well, eerily familiar.
And the person who is buried here, his name is Kar. And his name is written hieroglyphic as Kar. And actually...
That looks like me. Look at those ears.
Kar was a priest, scholar, and judge in ancient Egypt. The president summed up his visit to the pyramids with 2 words, awe-inspiring. Then he said it was time to get back to work. In other news, the mystery of Air France Flight 447, investigators reportedly are looking into the possibility that an equipment malfunction caused the Airbus 330 to fly too fast and are trying to determine whether that played a role in the crash, which killed 228 people. Tonight, CBS News has learned Airbus is advising pilots on procedures to follow if they suspect airspeed indicators are not working. Earlier today, the first bit of wreckage was pulled from the Atlantic, a cargo container, and the pilot of a Spanish jetliner that flew near the Air France jet Sunday night reported seeing a flash of white light that vanished in the ocean. Of course, investigators may never know for sure just what happened to Flight 447 unless they recover the flight recorders. And to say finding them will be difficult is an understatement. They could be at the bottom of the Atlantic more than 2 miles down. Meanwhile, some experts believe the whole concept of black boxes is out of date and it's time for a higher tech replacement. Here's Nancy Cordes.
When airliners crash, their black boxes nearly always provide the critical clues to what went wrong. If a black box is damaged or can't be retrieved, those secrets go down with it.
I think it is time that we look at some alternatives.
In an age when commercial planes are equipped with internet access for passengers, some experts question why flight data can't be beamed via satellite to a storage facility on the ground. No black box required.
People raise the issue of cost, but think of the tens of millions of dollars that are being spent right now mounting this search today in the South Atlantic.
A search that may prove fruitless. Investigators never found the black boxes from the planes that crashed into the World Trade Center on 9/11. Still, transmitting hundreds of flight parameters from the thousands of airplanes that are aloft at any one time would be an enormous undertaking.
We currently don't have the technological wherewithal for an aircraft to transmit that much data continuously.
And pilots say they wouldn't stand for it. Their unions have long objected to increased monitoring, nixing a recent proposal by Colgan Air to start randomly spot-checking cockpit recordings for excessive pilot chit-chat after one of its planes crashed in February, killing 50.
I don't know any working American who would volunteer to have someone tape record or some other way record every moment of every day of their working life.
It may be more feasible to simply beef up black boxes by making them floatable or designing their signal beacons to last longer than just 30 days. Nancy Cordes, CBS News, Reagan National Airport.
And coming up next, right here on the CBS Evening News, who can forget this picture? 20 years after the massacre in Tiananmen Square, elusive freedom, tortured memories. In North Korea today, 2 American journalists were put on trial accused of entering the country with hostile intent. Laura Ling and Yuna Lee were arrested in March. Since then, U.S. officials have been trying to persuade North Korea to release them, saying the women never intended to cross the border. They could get a 10-year prison sentence. Next door in China, the 20th anniversary of the brutal assault on pro-freedom and democracy demonstrators in Tiananmen Square. Chinese authorities would rather not look back.
You can't take photos.
Police in Beijing today refused to allow cameras to take pictures of Tiananmen Square, which was open to tourists. Still, people all over the world remember the crackdown. Barry Peterson, who was there 20 years ago, talked to one woman who will never forget.
Soldiers now moving into the square again from the south. This time, they're moving exactly toward us. I'm going to move out of the way.
Ding Zuling still mourns her 17-year-old son killed that night 20 years ago.
I'm luckier than other mothers. I know how he died. He received a single bullet through the heart.
That night, China turned on its young, killing by some estimates from hundreds to thousands. Ending in tragedy, what started with such hope. Students taking over Tiananmen Square, calling for freedom, and building a statue the world knew as the goddess of democracy. Because Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev was visiting, China had invited in the world press, including CBS News, who then saw a country turning against its leaders. 1 million or more people paraded through the square in those weeks to show support. The first time troops were sent in, the convoys were blocked. But 3 weeks later, the troops came back, killing at will. China's Premier Zhao supported the students. For this, he was put under house arrest. Before he died, he made audio tapes of his memoirs published in the U.S., tapes smuggled out by his one-time secretary, Bao Tong. The very day we went to interview Bao, we were told that he wasn't allowed to meet with the press. So we called. If a government is not willing to tell the truth to its own people, he told me, it probably won't be honest with the international community. 3 days after our interview, he was ordered to leave Beijing. Some things have changed since that night here on Tiananmen Square. Now, when China is accused of human rights abuses, it claims the moral high ground and points its finger at the United States, saying these days it is the U.S. that is guilty of torture and abuse. Ding Zuling says there is still that yearning for freedom her son died for.
Chinese people have democratic demands. We are not ignorant.
But today's younger generation is ignorant. They are not taught what happened. And many foreign internet sites about the Tiananmen massacre are blocked by the government. China's leaders do not want another generation inspired by the story of how, once, people by the millions and by the one demanded with only their courage that China change, and how some still believe that day is coming. Barry Peterson, CBS News, Beijing.
In Washington today, we learned that Judge Sonia Sotomayor was an early White House favorite for the Supreme Court. The Senate Judiciary Committee received 5 boxes of papers today detailing her record and her finances. In a committee questionnaire, Sotomayor said the White House first contacted her 4 days before Justice David Souter announced his retirement. Also in Washington, the SEC charged 3 former executives of Countrywide Financial with fraud, including CEO Angelo Mozillo. Investigators say the executives misled shareholders by painting a rosy picture even as Countrywide was collapsing because of bad loans. In other news, a tragic ending for a Hollywood star. David Carradine, best known as the star of the 1970s TV series Kung Fu, was found dead today in his hotel room in Thailand, where he was filming a movie. How he died is still under investigation.
Good afternoon, Grasshopper.
On Kung Fu, he was the good guy, the grasshopper known as Caine.
I have a solution. Ah! Gotcha!
As the title character of Kill Bill, he was bad to the bone. But throughout his career, David Carradine was always a fighter. The son of the prolific film actor John Carradine, he followed in his father's footsteps, though his heart belonged to music.
I'm only passing through.
Carradine appeared in more than 100 feature films and was a 4-time Golden Globe nominee.
A lot of people don't make it this far. I mean, I have seen so many people just fall by the wayside. There are no failures in Hollywood, only people who give up too soon.
Time for you to leave.
David Carradine was 72. We end tonight with a correction. The error was made 65 years ago in the fog of war. It was D-Day, June 6, 1944. Mark Strassman now with the story of an American hero and one man's campaign to set the record straight.
On D-Day, American soldiers came to France to save the world. They did, but this was the cost. D-Day's fallen. 9,387 men and women in uniform now lying in the American cemetery in Normandy. 65 years later, Eric Montgomery has also landed here on a mission of his own.
These men came here and gave all, and I wanted to give a little bit back.
Montgomery's great-uncle, Amin Isbir, died on Omaha Beach. This is D-Day video of Isbir's landing craft just before he hit the beach. Once ashore, he sought cover behind a truck, but a German shell found him anyway.
The shell hit at an angle to where it lifted up the vehicle and turned it over on him.
He was killed instantly right there.
but Isbeer's body wasn't found for 2 days. So all these years, his headstone had it wrong. It said he died on June 8th, not June 6th, D-Day itself. Finally, these workers were able to make it right because Eric Montgomery finally found the proof he needed. Proof that came from this man's efforts.
How you ended up in the Army Air Corps?
Tom Beatty's an Atlanta businessman who liked war stories. In his spare time, he started interviewing aging vets on camera.
The things these people saw are just amazing.
On his Witness to War website, Beatty has recorded 200 vets so far.
The Germans opened fire on me with machine guns.
And that's where we lost our first casualties.
2 of them landed with Amin Isbeer on D-Day and helped set his history straight.
He was dead, gone.
The broader history may or may not be concerned with the actual death date of one particular individual when so many died and so many were lost. But to the family, it means an extraordinary amount.
It does to Eric Montgomery. He spent 5 years proving family legend was right. A legacy reflected in one headstone and shared by so many. Mark Strassman, CBS News, Atlanta.
And that is the CBS Evening News for tonight. I'm Kitty Couric. Thanks for watching. Good night.